Hello, BookTube, and welcome to DuneTube 2019. This is a read-along of all of Frank Herbert's Dune novels. We started in the summer with his classic novel Dune, which is widely considered one of the greatest science fiction novels of all time. And we moved through Dune Messiah, and then Children of Dune, and now we are doing God Emperor of Dune, my favorite of the Dune books, which is a radical departure from the first three. Almost 4,000 years have passed since the end of Children of Dune to the beginning of this book. And one of the characters that we knew from Children of Dune, Leto, who was, when we met him, a young boy in Children of Dune, is still alive. In Children of Dune, he accepts a weird metamorphosis and undergoes it in a way that is available to no one else because his body is supercharged with the spice melange, which exists only on Dune, and which gives all sorts of accelerated mental and physical powers to some of the people who take it. It's extremely addictive. It prolongs your life. It's the coin of the galaxy. And in some people, especially the Atreides, the family that Leto is part of, they seem genetically predisposed to have an extreme reaction to the spice that includes an unbelievably detailed amount of prescience, of ability to foresee the future. And using that ability, Leto sees, even as a little boy, great peril facing the human race unless someone makes the enormous sacrifice to become a kind of hybrid human sandworm. The sandworms are these monstrous creatures that guard the spice in the sand in the open deserts of Dune. And Leto does this. He effects the transformation. We see it just beginning in Children of Dune, and in God Emperor of Dune, it is well along its way. He is not only barely recognizably human anymore, and he is not just the ironclad ruler of his empire, the empire that in its embryo state was taken by Paul Atreides in Dune. He's also its god. His prescience, combined with his fanatical fish speaker, all-female army, combined with his own inhuman status — he doesn't look human anymore — has allowed him to foster a kind of religion with himself as the center. And this book can be read. We are following now, I guess for want of a better term, the adventures of God Emperor Leto and his court. There's his major domo, Monio. There's Monio's daughter, Siona, who Leto fancies. She fancies herself a rebel against Leto's tyranny, but he fancies that he could train her to be a new member of his court. He says many times in this book that all of his best retainers were once rebels. There's also the Bene Gesserit, the all-female religious group or sociological group that we met in the first three books. They are still around. Same thing with the Bene Tleilaxu, the renegade sort of sybaritic flesh-worshipping sect who not only can train certain members of their hive mind to be face dancers, people who can transform their physical appearance, but who also provide all sorts of other services. These long-lived societies, these societies that were around in the original Dune days, are a weird counterpoint to Leto, who himself has been around now all these thousands of years. There's also Ix, the planet Ix, which provides all sorts of illicit technology. Leto sort of inherited a galaxy in which technology, there was an iffy relationship with technology, thanks to an event that had happened long before called the Butlerian Jihad, that absolutely outlawed some kinds of advanced technology. And you keep in mind, of course, all of this is going to seem a little bit strange to a lot of us because we are living in a science fiction future that Frank Herbert could only vaguely imagine. You have to keep that in mind with a lot of science fiction, actually, is that, you know, unless it's space operas set a million years in the future with thousands and thousands of ships and armadas, you're going to wonder. You're going to read it in the light of 2019 and wonder, well, okay, where's this basic piece of technology that we have all around us now? And the reason it's not in these books is because the author didn't think of it. I couldn't imagine it. You know, even the best futurists can't always do that. I always think of James Hogan's book, Thrice Upon a Time. He was a hard science fiction author who wrote a book probably 35, 40 years ago, wrote a book imagining the future set a little bit ahead of time, And there were air cars, but no internet. So he couldn't even imagine that until it started to happen. He couldn't even imagine it. But anyway, one of the key developments that we saw, what we see here in this book on one level is just the adventures of Emperor Leto. He has a vast storehold of spice. He has a fanatical army that can crush any of his opponents. He is the de facto ruler of all that he surveys. And all of these societies, Ix and the Bene Tleilaxu and the Great Houses and the Bene Gesserit, they have to sue for his goodwill. And they have to periodically go hand in hand to him for allotments of spice. There is no spice anymore. Dune has become a verdant land. There are no sandworms. There's only one tiny little patch of desert. Leto has by far the largest storehouse of spice that still exists. And he doles it out in order to maintain power. And in sort of exchange for that, he has created the golden path, Leto's peace. No high technology, no starvation, no want, no cruelty. If you want to go fishing all day, that's what you do. If you want to take a boat and sail it across an island, a body of water to another shore and meet someone, you go ahead and do that. It's a very different world than the one that we first meet in Dune. And Leto makes it clear that he is imposing that on humanity in order to save humanity from its worst impulses. But that's the bigger picture. That's the bigger picture stuff that Leto is forever prattling about in this book. On the practical level, there is a plot. And it involves Ix. It involves the planet Ix, who have their previous ambassador to Leo's court was a man named Malki. And we haven't met Malki yet. We will, just briefly. But we know he echoes all throughout the book in the beginning here that he, despite the fact that Leto is thousands of years old and has seen many, many humans come and go, Malki fascinated him and amused him and scandalized him. They almost were friends. And the new ambassador to Leto's court from Ix is a woman named Hui Nori. And from what Leto is able to figure out, and from what Hui Nori herself is able to tell him, she was born and made probably from Malki in a specific attempt by Leto's opponents on the planet Ix. Leto has no one but opponents. He doesn't have allies. As he himself points out many times, he doesn't have allies. But he does have opponents. He has plenty of people who would like to break his stranglehold on reality, on the daily reality of the Empire. And apparently the masterminds of Ix have created Hui Nori and raised her to be a god trap. Not because she's dangerous, but just the opposite. Because they have raised her to be a pure soul of empathy. Someone who they have calculated is exactly the kind of person that Leto would have fallen in love with had he stayed human. And it works. We meet Hui, and Frank Herbert has the unbelievably unenviable task of writing a paragon who is still human, who is still believable. And he does it. He manages to do it. Hui is actually an interesting character. She can't help how she was made, and she also can't help her human feelings. She develops human feelings for the one person in the book she's not allowed to have them for. But she has feelings for Leto as well. She loves him, and he loves her, even though he knows that is meant to be a trap. It's meant to trap him. It's meant to get him to act out of weakness in a way that he would never have done before. And we don't really know how the Ixians managed to do that, but it doesn't ultimately matter. We're supposed to assume that there's some sort of technology involved, genetic or otherwise, that would allow them to do it. But almost from the minute that he meets her, the trap is sprung, and he is in love with her. And this scandalizes Monio, his major domo. It scandalizes almost everyone, especially when Leto announces that he intends to wed her. As the characters in the book point out, he hasn't taken a wife in 1,000 years. And it would be a sham wedding anyway, of course. He doesn't have genitalia anymore. The worm body is most of his body. But it would still be real. And it naturally sends a shiver of disruption through the ranks of the fish speakers, who have considered themselves to be sort of the holy handmaidens of God. For God to take a wife naturally upsets that chemistry quite a bit and may make for rancor. And it sends a shockwave through the court. Monio is dead set against it. Leto is already the subject of all sorts of prurient jokes and gossip, and this will seem to make that only worse. But Leto doesn't brook any interference. He wants this to happen. And he wants it to happen even though he's facing unrest in a number of different corners. In earlier chapters that we read, a very near thing, almost, there's an attack on him and his court as they're making a progression to a festival city. The Bene Tleilaxu organize an attack that almost succeeds. That sort of flies in the face of 3,000 years of Leto's placid peace. We get hints, we're told over and over again in the early chapters that we've been reading, that Leto's prescience will foresee a knot of trouble, and the fish speakers will be there to stamp it out before it happens. But the knots of trouble do happen. This isn't the paradise that it might have seemed was being foretold in the final pages of Children of Dune. And in the chapters that we're reading today, this is our penultimate look at this book, there's another attack. This time, not on Leto directly, but rather on the Ixian embassy. There's an attack with explosives and technological weapons, a coordinated series of attacks designed, I guess, on one level, to kill Hui Nori. After Leto announces this whole deal, that the Ixian embassy is attacked. And when Leto learns about it, as it's happening, he has a mechanical cart that moves him around. He can only flop otherwise on solid ground. He's pretty good at moving through sand, but his subjects never see him otherwise than on his procession cart. He wheels his cart up to the surface, sees the attack happening on the embassy, and hurls himself into battle, physically. Throws himself off his cart and starts crushing people left and right with the immense bulk of his body, even though the liquid in their blood burns his skin. He is that much of a sandworm. Water is poison to him. And that is the dramatic scene in the chapters that we're reading today, is that the point that I wanted to bring to your attention is that apart from all of the metaphysical chatter, there's quite a bit of that. Leto never stops with it. There is also a plot happening, and the plot is that there, in this relatively short amount of time, we're seeing more and more of these attacks on Leto, or on the settled order of his empire. This is not a world at rest at all. And of course, that culminates in the chapters that we're reading next time. We'll finish out this book next time, and that it culminates then. And before I wrap this up for today, I wanted to mention, I'm rereading this, of course, for this read-along, and I'm enjoying it. I'm loving it, absolutely loving it. But I'm struck, one of the risks that you run when you set a book so far in the future of your previous book is that you're going to have readers who are going to they're going to wonder why you are. Why are you doing that? Now, on one level, that's understandable. One level, you can answer that the beginning of this whole Golden Path plan is a lot less interesting than its fruition or maybe even its end. And Leto as a man is a lot less interesting than Leto as a semi-human god. But on the other hand, reading this book, I'm thinking, well, okay, 3,500 years is a long time. It's a very, very long time. No one has thought to overwhelm Leto's guards with physical force before now. No one has tried and succeeded, come closer than the attack we see earlier in this book. And also, the trap with Hui Nori, that you make a soft trap instead of a hard one. No one's thought to do that. No one. At some point, like for instance, in the chapters that we're reading next, we get some pointed references to weather satellites, to Ixian weather control over the planet Dune, and how it's not a perfect thing. Well, okay, it isn't a perfect thing. That means that it's subject to human fallacy, and if it's subject to human fallibility, it's also subject to human greed. And weather control could make it rain on the planet Dune, and rain would kill Leto or very severely wound him. And if you coordinated an attack of 100 face dancers with a rainstorm, I think that might succeed. And I think somebody would have thought of that in the first 1,000 years, let alone 3,500 years. So I'm curious to know, those of you who are reading along, what are you making of, if we pause just for a minute from the higher elements involved in the story and just talk about what are you making of Leto's physical control of his empire? Does it convince you? What do you think of Herbert's decision to set this story now in this timeline instead of at some other time. I myself would, if Herbert were still alive and were still willing, I would pay him a large sum of money to write a novel in between Children of Dune and God Emperor of Dune. Write a novel about Leto when he still had two legs, when he was forming this empire. I think that would be fascinating, and I pray that we don't ever get, a novel like that in the fan fiction that has crowded around these Dune books. That fan fiction is typically not very good. I would rather have Frank Herbert do it. Maybe a Gola would be in order. But anyway, that wraps it up for now. No reason to give you a stopping or starting point for next time, because we're just going to finish the book next time. So we will wrap up God Emperor of Dune next time, and I'll give you a few windy bloviations on it. So I'll wrap this up for now, but we have plenty of other stuff to talk about. So I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.